Good evening, everyone. Hopefully you're having a wonderful Saturday so far. I got a good one for you today. Seems like Guilbeault is back, and he thought he'd do an interview with Vasi Capoles. And let's say it did not go to plan. First off, if you like this video, if you could please subscribe, that would be awesome. And with no further ado, let's get into it.
Environment Minister Guilbeault. Hi, Minister Guilbeault. Good to welcome you back to our studios. Thank you for making the time.
Pleasure to be here.
I appreciate it. I listened to your press conference in detail today, and I wanted to start off with a very simple question. Is there any chance on April 1st that your government does not increase the price on carbon?
No, and people have to understand that it's not something that the Minister of Environment can decide on its desk. Like, this is a regulatory process. If we wanted to change something, we have to go through regulatory consultations. We have to publish a document. This takes months, but we have no intention of doing this because again, today, the Insurance Bureau of Canada says that just for the months of July and August, we broke the record for the cost of natural catastrophes in Canada. 2 months. And 2024 is already the costliest summer year so far in terms of environmental impacts due to climate change. So we need to keep acting because otherwise we'll never see the end of it.
I would really like to see how those environmentalists figured out that all of that cost came from climate change, like all of those climate disasters. Because back in the day, we had climate disasters back before the Industrial Revolution. I'm pretty sure we had climate disasters. So how would you take that and say those things are not from climate change, but then say, oh, these wildfires, this hurricane, that was from climate change? It's impossible. And it's impossible to say. Now, on his fact that, we can't put any bills through and just tell them to stop implementing the carbon tax. Actually, the Prime Minister can do that. It's called an order in council. All the Prime Minister has to do is put one of those through, and then automatically, there you go. The carbon tax is stopped. Now, let's say in a world where he couldn't put an order in council through, you said it'll take a couple of months. The Conservatives are going to vote with you to put this bill through. So that means it's going to go through easy through Parliament. And so at least by April, when you're going to increase the carbon tax, you can say to stop the carbon tax. And at any point in time, you can stop this. So I don't understand.
I certainly do take your point on that, and I listened very carefully to the way in which you and your colleagues have consistently been describing the significance, in your view, of this policy. And I guess I would counter and put forward, people who are not, as you described the Conservatives to be, without a climate plan. People like Premier Eby in New Brunswick, Jagmeet Singh with British Columbia. Thank you. Premier Higgs is also an opposer of your policy, but yes, Premier Eby, thank you. Premier Fury out in Newfoundland and Labrador, a Liberal. Jagmeet Singh, Bonnie Crombie, the leader of the Ontario Liberals. These are not people who say climate change isn't real or we shouldn't do anything. But they have deduced that there is not the collective buy-in necessary to put forward the consumer carbon tax. Why is that argument lost on you?
Well, it's not lost on me. I mean, it's difficult. And sometimes showing leadership is doing things that are difficult. We could say, okay, well, we'll give up because it's too hard, it's too complicated. But unfortunately, those people, including some that I really respect, have yet to show how we make up for the lost in terms of being able to reduce our climate change pollution. Like, this measure alone will give us 10% of our overall emission reduction by 2030. If there's another measure out there that comes at no cost to Canadian taxpayers and that would allow us to reduce 10% of our overall greenhouse gas emissions by 2030, I'll take it right away. I've been looking at this for 30 years and it doesn't exist.
So your contention is there is
So if you've been looking at this for 30 years and you haven't figured out another way to reduce our environmental impact other than taxing the citizens to death, you are terrible at your job. That means you are not good and you should go into something else. Because I don't know, how about this? Let's create, through technology, I don't know, cleaner energy. For instance, we used to use coal, but then we found natural gas, which is a ton cleaner than coal. So a lot of us switched to natural gas. And then we found, I don't know, nuclear energy, which has a it doesn't create any carbon. But the government doesn't want to build nuclear energy because apparently they think we still have a bad view on nuclear energy. But wait, humanity's created crazy technology called a recycled nuclear energy plant, where we can take nuclear waste and use that to create energy. But are we building any of those plants? No. So if a guy who just reads news and reads stuff on the internet knows more about getting a better environment and not taxing the taxpayer or taxing its citizens, that means you are terrible at your job. But like I said, what do I know? I'm just a guy who reads stuff on the internet.
There is no other policy that could displace the consumer portion of the carbon tax. The NDP, for example, puts forward that an intensification of the industrial side of the carbon tax.
We've already done that.
And so you're not prepared to do any more on that end?
The price on pollution continues to go up. Including for large polluters. We had a revision of the industrial price a year and a half ago. We're in the process of starting another review. We do that on a regular basis. It's already baked into the system. So this idea that we didn't think about that, we have, and it's already scheduled. Like it's already happening. So I mean, I frankly I think I'm very disappointed with the NDP. And I think there are a lot of people out there who are disappointed with the NDP because time and time again they've said we support carbon pricing. We believe that 8 out of 10 Canadians get more money back than what they pay. We believe it's one of the most important measures to fight climate change. And then under pressure from the Conservative Party leader, Pierre Poilievre, they caved. That's what they did.
But maybe there's another way to...
The parliamentary budget officer didn't just say it, but right after you put out the carbon tax, they made a whole document saying there's a net loss for the taxpayer when you include the net negative economic effects of the carbon tax. When you include everything in our economy, the cost on food, all the costs going up, it's a net negative to everyone. But you guys didn't care about that. You shout, oh, but insurance companies say because of all these fires and all that, prices are going up. Well, yeah, because inflation has gone up. If the cost of wood has gone up immensely, of course insurance is gonna say that the price of these wildfires and stuff has increased as well. Duh. But the Liberals are gonna twist this to say, oh, it's because of climate change.
to look at it. Maybe they are responding to public sentiment that has increasingly become opposed to the imposition of this carbon tax, regardless of the arguments that your government is making. And again, I'll circle back to the individuals I named. People like Premier Eby and Bonnie Crombie are not out there saying there should be no climate plan, we shouldn't do anything to address climate change, or trying to downplay the impact of climate change. They're simply acknowledging what I think public opinion polling has borne out quite clearly, that there is not the support out there for this policy.
So there's less support than there was. I wouldn't say that there's no support at all. And I think we need to do a better job of communicating this. It is a complex piece of regulations and legislation. And it is true that, it's easier to say axe a tax than to explain the whole process of why we're doing this and how it works. We need to do a better job of communicating this, and we will continue to be doing that. And we've started making some changes. We have other changes in terms of how we communicate, how we talk about this that are coming out the door, and we're confident that we can get back the support of many Canadians for this.
Are you sure that you can?
So I don't want to put words in Guilbeault's mouth, but what it sounds like he's saying is Canadians are too stupid to understand what the carbon tax is, even after 9 years. And these simpletons can only understand small language like axe the tax. So don't believe your lying eyes. Believe the government, because only we understand the truth.
And I put to you, for example, the question of affordability, because I think what you have done, and I've listened to it consistently again, is really push back against the idea that Canadians feel that this is something that impacts their own cost of living, right? And you point to the rebate and the analysis that has been done that show Sure. There is an additional analysis, though, that has been done by the Parliamentary Budget Officer that looks at the cumulative economic impact. So not just fiscal impact of indirect and direct, but with the rebate, but the cumulative economic impact. And it says that for Canadians, their overall costs, which now include the fuel charge and GST paid and lower employment and investment income, exceed the rebate and the induced reduction in personal income taxes arising from the loss in income. There is an argument to be made that Canadians do feel the imposition of this has affected their affordability and the overall economy.
The Parliamentary Budget Officer also recognized that he did not take into account the cost to Canadians of climate change. Those $7 billion that we were talking about earlier, we're all paying for this. Like, no one gets a bill at home and say, okay, well, this is your portion of the overall Canadian bill for climate impacts this year, but we are paying it. And it's gone up 10 times compared to just about 10 years ago. And it's going to continue going up unless we tackle climate change. And it's easy to say, oh, Canada only accounts for a small portion of the overall emissions.
Let's just take a quick stop right there. So he admits that they all know that there's a net loss for Canadians. But yes, still puts up the guise that, Canadians lose this $7 billion. Well, the reason why we don't believe that we're actually losing this $7 billion is because the Parliamentary Budget Officer hasn't said and put out documents saying that with climate change, this is the amount that you would lose for climate disasters, or not climate disasters, for natural disasters. And this amount is what you'd lose without it. And here's all the data that we've compiled. The reason why we don't believe you is because there's no evidence of it. Like I said, you just ask us to believe you after all the lies you've told us, and we don't anymore. When the citizens can't afford food, can't afford housing, can't afford the basics of their lives, they care less about the environment and care more about living. But because you live behind your walls and live up on high and look down on us, you don't understand the concept of not being able to live. And that's how this works.
Well, how, if we're not doing it here, how can I go and talk to China or India or other large polluters in the world and say, listen, folks, we have to work together and find a solution to this, because otherwise all of our population, regardless of where you are and who you are, will suffer from this.
I think if I understand the concern that Canadians, as they direct it to me, is it's the argument that your government makes that without the carbon tax, we won't be able to meet our climate targets. We will not be able to counter the impacts of climate change, as if it's some sort of panacea in order to address that. And why they say, hey, we're just a small portion of it, is because I think that's also true, right? We aren't, I understand your point that if we don't do it, we can't expect others to. But the carbon tax itself at 10% of your overall emissions reductions by 2030 is not going to stop a fire from hitting Jasper.
No, and it's going to take years and years. Let me make a parallel. Under a previous Conservative government, Canada...
Now I'm going to talk about this real quick, because what's coming up about the fires in Jasper should anger everyone, and I want to separate this from what he said before. So he says he can't go to China and India and all that and talk to them about climate change if we don't do that here. Which I agree with Vashi and him. That's true. But we could do that through technology here in Canada rather than taxing our citizens, because it doesn't, the numbers don't add up. He says that, and he says that with our carbon tax, he can go over to China and tell them about the carbon rebate and tell them about, oh, how good this carbon tax is. Yet, when he goes over to China, and China tells him, yeah, you can come over here and be on our environmental board, but don't you be spewing those words about a tax on carbon. Don't you be saying anything about environmentalism. And even if he was, even when we're getting taxed to death, China's still putting or building coal power plants. India's still building coal power plants. And same with Africa. So what you're doing isn't working. How about we trade our liquid natural gas to these countries in Asia and all of that, so they can use a greener fuel than coal. It'll stop the pollution in their cities, which is better for their citizens. How about you create nuclear power plants in Canada and show them that you can have green energy in your country and less pollution, and your citizens can still thrive without more taxes. And I'm saying your citizens can thrive. Then that would give all these other countries the initiative and the gumption to put that through. But those countries look at us and they're like, your citizens are starving. They're living in poverty. There's homelessness that's rampant. And nobody can afford a home. Why would we follow what you're doing? It's ridiculous. And yet Guilbeault doesn't seem to realize this. I think the UK just said a while back that they're not going to use Canada as an example of what to do.
Work with the world to tackle ozone depletion. Remember, late 80s, everyone was talking about that, the ozone layer. Well, there's the Montreal Protocol. It was signed in Montreal in 1987, thanks to Brian Mulroney. We now know that the ozone layer will have recovered from decades of abuse by humans in 2060, 2070. We signed the agreement in 1987. That's the time scale we're looking at to try and fix climate change. There are no magic solutions. There's no magic wands that you
but
can
you kind
wave.
of have presented the carbon tax as a magic.
So now he's saying the Jasper fires was caused by ozone depletion. Well, let's look at that, shall we? We have some documents here that say otherwise. So unfortunately, this used to be on Twitter, but it's not on there anymore. So fortunately, I took a little snapshot of it, and this is an email sent from Jonah Mitchell, sent to Melanie Kwong. And the subject was firefighter recruitment. They said, some good points to think about. I'll add two. Last year, and this is about, has to do with the Jasper fires, is they say last year Nick Irving had to push hard, but eventually got to separate evacuation support incident management team going to HREU and ops. We should work to ensure that we're ready to go in the event one administrative notes in evacuated this year. So they knew an evacuation in Jasper might happen. They go on to say, we have a small team on standby at the PCX lead and some dedicated HR and internal comms folks to support displaced staff and families. So yeah, they knew this was going to happen, or they at least anticipated. But the more important thing comes after. In the highlighted section, it says, at what point do we make the organized decision to cancel planned prescribed burns in Western Canada? As more and more media articles raise public concern over drought conditions, public and political perspective may become more important than actual prescribed window or prescription windows. And this was sent in February of last year, was it? No, February of this year. So this was sent in the winter time. So what they were worried about... okay, let's go through this first. If you don't know what prescribed burns are, they're also called controlled burns. So they burn off a lot of the undergrowth, a lot of the dead wood, and a lot of the the stuff in the forest to maintain our forests, and so new plants can grow. It's kind of like what what nature does naturally. It's just we kind of control it so it doesn't burn down our towns. It doesn't burn where we don't want it to, because a lot of these fires, they start with thunderstorms. So what they're saying here is the government's worried that the public perception of this would be that this is burning down our forests or something like that. So our government's more worried about political perception than the actual issue of why we're having these forest fires. And this has been happening for a long time. So this just goes to show the reason why we're having more and more of these worse and worse forest fires is because our governments are getting more worried about how the optics of how we deal with these forest fires and how we prevent them, rather than preventing the actual fire. And this is the issue here in Canada. Is our government's more worried about perception than actually being leaders and doing the right thing, even though it's hard. And even though it's difficult, and there might be some blowback from some people who don't know what prescribed burns are, or don't know the reason of them, or if, like in Banff, when things get wrong, it creates a small fire, then there's a little bit blowback, and then they have to explain why this is done all over again. But most Canadians know why we do prescribed burns. We're not idiots. We know why this is done. And this just goes to show this is why it's getting worse and worse and worse, but they're blaming it on climate change because it's easy. And I got this off of Northern Perspective at first, because Northern Perspective were the first ones to gather this email and gather this information. I was just lucky enough to take a snapshot of it before it was taken down off of X. I can't even find the person who first posted it, unfortunately. Now back to the video and watching Guilbeault pretty much do even worse.
No, not at all. I mean, we're doing clean fuel standards to ensure that refineries are also reducing their climate impact. We're doing zero emission vehicle standards to ensure that by 2035, 100% of cars sold in Canada will be zero emission vehicle. We're working on the electricity. We're working on methane. We're making massive historic investment in transit, in active transportation, and electrification of transportation. We've deployed more than 100 measures. But the reality is that even with all those measures, we still have more work to do to meet our 2030 targets. And you could say, well, those targets are arbitrary. Well, I mean, science tells us that we need to reduce by at least 40% by 2030.
You're only at 8%.
Oh, that's in 2023.
Yeah.
You have to remember that our inventories are always 2 years behind. And it's never happened before in the history of Canada, Vashi, that our emissions, our pollution levels have gone down while the economy was booming. Never before. The only times where our emissions have gone down in the last 50 years, economic recession, financial crisis, COVID. It's the first time that we can actually show that we can do this. Now, we need to do more.
And when they try to explain how our economy is booming while this is going down, just listen to Trudeau, because he says, oh, our macro economy. Whatever that means. The micro economy looks terrible, which the micro economy, and I'm just using their words, is the food you can't afford anymore, the rent you can't afford anymore, the houses you can't afford anymore. Everything that people need to house themselves, need to eat, need to live is going up. But don't worry, everyone. Our macro economy is exploding. So don't believe your lying eyes, because everything is going to be all right. Believe the government. Even though you can't, even though 48% of Canadians are living in poverty, 2 million new Canadians are going to food banks for the first time. Even though we're starting to see homeless tents go up in a bunch of our bigger cities. But don't worry. Listen to the government. You will own nothing and be happy, but you'll be fine.
And I'm the first one to recognize that. We have more things coming, the cap on oil and gas emissions, clean electricity regulations, new methane regulations. We need to do more, but we were in 2023 at 8%. We need to get to minus 40. We need to accelerate the pace, and that's why we're deploying all those measures. And
what does it mean for this measure? May I interrupt for 1 second? Because just to point out, you're right to point out that the economy expanded, but yet emissions went down. First time that happened. They went down by 1%. The Canadian Climate Institute, which presented that analysis for 2023, said that overall we're at 8% below 2005. We need to be at 40%. They specifically said things need to accelerate. Beyond 2030, how much more of an increase are consumers in for when it comes to the fuel charge?
So we haven't done that analysis. We haven't even haven't figured out what will be our next target for 2035. We have to do that. We're obligated by law in Canada, but also as per our international agreements under the United Nations to do that by the end of the year, beginning of next year. So we're working on that. But we know, I mean, the target is to be what we call net zero, carbon neutral. So if we emit in 2050 some carbon left, we'll have to find ways to capture those carbon emissions. That's the goal. So what will 2035 look like, 2040? We're doing the work. We're not there yet, but we will be there pretty soon.
Is it fair to assume, though, that the price on carbon, if we need to be more aggressive in meeting our emissions targets, will continue to increase beyond 2030? It's not going to stay at $170, will it?
Well, I mean, the idea is not to...
Yeah, it's going to go up every year. It's going to go up every year. And it's going to go up every year because the government doesn't have any other way to tax us more than they already are. And it's an easy way to tax us even more than we all already are. We will never reach our goal because this is the easy way to get money. And because the government keeps on spending and spending and spending and spending and has no other way to get that money.
Increase the price on pollution for the sake of increasing the price on pollution. The idea is to use this measure to ensure that it drives down pollution and it drives in investment in cleaner technologies, in renewable energy, in cleaner fuels. So there's no...
So if you reach your targets, let's say by 2030, is there a chance that price stays the same?
If we come to the conclusion that we don't need to keep increasing it and that emissions will continue to go down because of all the other things we're doing, then there's no reason to continue increasing it. And that's why we've made a commitment to 2030. We have to figure out the analysis and what we need to do more for after 2030, and hard carbon pricing will contribute to that.
Okay, I'm going to leave it on that note, Minister. I appreciate your time as always. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
See, he just admitted that they're not going to get rid of it because he said they're going to review to see how carbon pricing is going to contribute to getting to their new goal. But what do you guys think? Do you think by 2030, if we hit our goals, if we ever do you think that the Liberal government, if still in power, would take it off? Or do you think they'll just increase it until Canadians can't afford bread? Also, if you like this video, leave a like below. And if you could subscribe, that would be awesome as well. I am hoping to get to 500 subscribers by the end of the month. So if you could help me get to that would be awesome. Other than that, that's all I got for you. Have a good day, folks.